There are 10 questions that you need to be thinking about as you move forward. How do you describe your organization's culture? And do your employees agree with your definition? Let me tell you, when you bring in new employees, what frequently sidetracks the issue is that they don't understand your culture and they really don't fit well. So you need to understand what your culture is, test your understanding with your employees, and that gives you a great foundation on which you can move forward. What's your organization's reputation as an employer? This is called the recruiting brand. A lot of hospitals are absolutely blind to this. They don't think it's an issue, they don't ask the question, and they can't understand why they're not getting the best people. Hey, bad news travels fast. So you need to stop and say, what is my recruiting brand? Is HR creative, and are they capable of finding the best people? In some hospitals, regrettably, HR, they're not as much about recruiting and talent acquisition as they are about administration, benefits, etc. So really, you got to stop and say, can my HR department, can my recruiting team find me the best people? Or are they just order takers? That's not going to work in this new healthcare environment. How does your organization screen candidates? This is another big breakdown when you're bringing people into the organization. Just because they have credentials, it doesn't necessarily mean they can do the job. So you need to spend time on the technical aspects of what do they know and how experienced are they. You've got to measure that. But you also have to figure out what kind of person are they? What are their values? Do their point of view, does it match with the organization in terms of service, in terms of quality, in terms of safety? Those are all big important things, and you need to spend time interviewing the candidate for their values. Behavior and values interviews are really, really important. Brad Smart wrote a great book called Top Grading. They used that in Jack Welch's day at GE to build strong organizations. Today, that company still promotes 90% of their senior executives from within. Very few organizations can claim that. Top grading is a great way to screen employees. At the lower level, you can't use the full process because it's very time consuming. But at the senior level, our company uses it a lot, and our stick rate is excellent. That's why we can guarantee placement at the senior level for 36 months. You're not always going to get that kind of stick rate at the lower level, but you really have to try. How does your organization screen the candidates? Who owns the outcome? Are you selecting the best candidates in town? Do you even know at your competitors, if somebody left, who you'd like to steal? And people say, well, that's not really ethical. Listen, trust me, your competitor they're not really concerned about whether you're successful or not. How does your organization orient new employees? This is where things really fall apart as well. People come into the organization and we don't do a good job onboarding them, preparing them to come into the organization. We don't prepare them to come into our family. And that's where we foul up, and this is really important. If you're not bringing in the right people to your organization, if you're not orienting them, if you're not inculcating your values into the way they work, you're going to have significant problems in your empowerment process. Does your organization use onboarding? You know, healthcare, we're always behind the curve. Most other major corporations have very sophisticated onboarding programs. Very, very few hospitals even know what the term means. It starts well before you even recruit. Why are we recruiting this person? How are we going to define this person's success? And then it's an entire process of taking those issues, screening the people, and bring them into the family in a productive way. We waste so much time with orientation. You know the definition of orientation, don't you? That's where you learn that's where you learn and sit through 3 or 4 days and you learn how to get fired. They'll tell you everything you're not supposed to do and then you sign all the forms. That's a very inefficient way. We've got to do a better job. If we're going to empower our employees, why can't we empower our orientation process? That's pretty deadly in most hospitals. What is your rate of mishires? You know, there's a huge cost in mishires. We never report it on our financial statements. I worked with a hospital in the upper Midwest. The cost of their mishires in nursing, their turnover rate and hiring the wrong people was somewhere between $4 and $6 million a year. You can't afford that. I have a client that pays major bonuses up front to bring the nurses to town, only to lose them to the competitor sometimes in less than a year. It costs them $60,000 a nurse when that happens. You can't have that. You can't build a good, cohesive workforce if you're constantly training your people for your competitor. Does your organization consistently conduct exit interviews? You know, we all need feedback. That's really, really important. How do you know what's going on if somebody's not telling you? Every time I do a presentation and ask this question, only a few hands go up when I ask, do you hear what happens in the exit interviews? Or is that just confidential? It doesn't help to do exit interviews if you don't use it as a teaching moment, as a positive moment. Sometimes people leave for good reasons and they can provide you with constructive criticism. As a leader, this is how you get better, learning this. A lot of hospitals, their annual evaluation program are those silly performance reviews. What does that usually mean? I survived another year, I got a raise. That's silly. We can't do that. We need to have a more comprehensive approach to evaluating our talent. Major corporations have war rooms where they track their supervisory, management, and executive level people. Who's doing good? Who needs help? How can we coach them to make them B's and to A players? Who are the C players? How do we get them out of the organization? Sometimes a C player in your department can move to a new department and be a B or an A player. So you need to have that comprehensive approach if you're going to have an empowered workforce. How productive is your team? We're paying 100%. Are we getting 100% from our employees? In most healthcare organizations, not even close. So you need to ask that tough question. And how do you describe your leadership style? Have you ever asked somebody a question and you got that deer in the headlight moments? This happens all the time and when you're interviewing executives and managers. Describe your leadership style. And a lot of times what we hear is that awful cliche, I'm a participatory leader. Think about what your style is and come up with a great description of how you lead. And as you're doing that, think about how you can get better. That's a great exercise for a manager and an executive.